This tape is said from the Shabbos Farbrengen of Parsha Naso. Beis 7, Tavshin Dalet Mem, June 2nd, 1984. And this tape is set for memory, and it is unedited.
Gut Woch. Der Rebbe soll gesund sein. Der Rebbe soll gesund sein began the Farbrengen this afternoon. That today is Beis Sivan. 2 days in the month of Sivan. And we find in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. And immediately as he mentioned the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, he discussed the great accuracy, how everything is extremely accurate by the Alter Rebbe. Though the Alter Rebbe himself did not put the Shulchan Aruch to print, Shulchan Aruch was not printed while the Alter Rebbe was alive, besides for exceptions, Hilchas Talmud Torah. However, the Shulchan Aruch is extremely accurate and written by the Alter Rebbe himself. The dinim of Shavuos, Hilchas Shavuos, come in the Shulchan Aruch as part of Hilchas Pesach. The Rebbe says it is wrong to say, like some want to say, that the reason there are no separate halachas for Shavuos is because that the halachas of Shavuos are really very, very little. This in itself is not a good enough reason why there shouldn't be a separate halachas of Shavuos. However, the real reason is because Shavuos is really comes in the continuation to Pesach. As we find in Chumash, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, "B'yitziyachas ha'amim Mitzrayim." What was the ultimate goal of Yitzias Mitzrayim? It was Matan Torah. So Matan Torah, which is Shavuos, and Yitzias Mitzrayim, which was Pesach, are really close, very, very much one to another. And it is for this reason that Alter Rebbe put together Hilchas Shavuos together with Hilchas Pesach. Furthermore, it is brought in Svarim that just like Shmini Atzeres comes after Sukkot as a Shmini Atzeres to the Yontif of Sukkot, Shavuos is like the Shmini Atzeres of Pesach. So really, both Yom Tovim are really bound one with another very, very strong. And it is after Hilchas Pesach, as part of Hilchas Pesach, that Alter Rebbe also brings the dinim that are Negei Shavuos. Rebbe said something interesting, that was the children of the Alter Rebbe, the sons of the Alter Rebbe, who were the first that printed the Shulchan Aruch after the Alter Rebbe passed away. The date that they write to their Hakdama to the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch is the date of Yud Beis Tammuz. Getting back to Beis Sivan, so the Alter Rebbe writes that on this day of Beis Sivan, it was when the Yidden were told, Moshe Rabbeinu told them, in the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Va'atem tiyu li mamleches koyanim v'goy kodesh, that Yidden will be considered a mamleches koyanim, a kingdom of koyanim, and goy kodesh, and a holy nation. This was related to the Yidden on this day, today, Beis Sivan. All this comes as a preparation to Matan Torah. As the Alter Rebbe himself writes in the Shulchan Aruch, that beginning from Rosh Chodesh until Ches Sivan, we do not say any Tachton. This is what the Alter Rebbe writes in the Shulchan Aruch. In the Siddur of the Alter Rebbe, which is, for those who are familiar in the details, the Siddur was written much later than the Shulchan Aruch. That is where the Alter Rebbe writes that we do not recite any Tachnun from Rosh Chodesh until 12 days in the month of Sivan. He adds on the additional days, the Yemei Tashlumin. So firstly, the question arises, why does the Alter Rebbe have to stress that we do not say Tachnun on Rosh Chodesh Rosh Chodesh Sivan, we regardless don't say Tachnon. We don't say Rosh Chodesh Sivan, just like we do not say any other Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is a day which we don't say Tachnon on. So we automatically see that this Rosh Chodesh has a specialty to it, that this Rosh Chodesh already has a Shaykhas to Matan Torah. And Beis Sivan is the day when we were told, Va'atem tiyuli mamlechas kohenim v'goy kodesh. The emes, all this comes as a preparation to Kabbalah Torah. And as a preparation to Kabbalah Torah, the Yidden had to go through several procedures. Actually, it was an Indian of Geirus. For Geirus, we know there is a need for Tefillah, there is need for Kabbalah's mitzvahs, and there is need for Milah. So Tefillah, there is no mention where the Tefillah was, but obviously the Rebbe says we must say that there must have been some sort of Tefillah. The Yidden immersed somewhere in a mikveh before they became Yidden. Kabbalah's mitzvahs was expressed in the fact when the Yidden agreed to say Naso v'nishma, this is an inyan of Kabbalah's mitzvahs. They accepted upon themselves the yoke of the mitzvahs. As far as Milah, when the Yidden mal the Mitzrayim, which this came as a preparation to eating the Korban Pesach, because otherwise they were prohibited from eating the Korban Pesach. This Milah served also as a preparation for them to the Geilus. However, being that all this comes as a continuation to Pesach, by Pesach we know we also had the Lamakim Mitzrayim B'Fchoreim, that the Rebbe set aside a special Kedusha to B'chorim. After what has transpired on Yud Nisan, which, as it is known to us, it is Shabbos HaGodel, incidentally. This is another union which the Rebbe explained, that the Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch, the very beginning of Hilchas Pesach, tells us about the war which was going on amongst the Mitzrim themselves, amongst their Pchorim and the Mitzrim. Because when the Pchorim heard that the Rebbe is going to plague all the firstborns and is going to kill all the firstborn, all the Mitzrim, that is when they came and were demanding from the Mitzrim they should release the Yidden. The Mitzrim, on the other hand, didn't want. So this is where a war broke out between the Pchorim Mitzrayim and the regular Mitzrim, Lamakim Mitzrayim B'Fchoreim. When did this happen? This happened on Yud Nisan, on 10 days in the month of Nisan, which in that year was as well Shabbos HaGodel. Shabbos HaGodel then came out Yud Nisan. Shulchan Aruch tells us that for L'doros, for eternity, to celebrate this thing, it was not set aside the date of Yud Nisan, because Yud Nisan is the day when Miriam passed away. So it was rather selected that on Shabbos HaGodel, which is regardless whether it is Yud Nisan or another day in Nisan, on that day we celebrate this greatness. As an outcome of that, that is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu has selected the Pchorim to serve him. Koyanim serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's in the replacement of B'chorim. So actually this idea of Atem Tiyuli Mamleches Koyanim V'goy Kodesh, that Yidden should be considered Koyanim, the whole concept of Kahuna, this all already began in existence, not only now on Beis Sivan, but this tracks back to the days when the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim. So Rebbe says, Memela, we must say that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is relating the message now on 2 days in the month of Sivan, Va'atem tiyuli mamleches koyanim, the meaning is something yet greater than a kohen gadol. That each and every Yid is considered like a kohen gadol. This is the tremendous love and chashivas which the Rebbe is expressing to Yidden, that as an introduction to Matan Torah, he's telling them, Va'atem tiyuli. Tiyu is an expression of the future. In other words, once Yidden will accept the Torah upon them, once we will go through the procedure of Matan Torah, each and every Yid will be considered like a Kohen Gadol. What is the difference between a Kohen Gadol and a regular Kohen? So we find in Chumash that a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to be zich metamei to anyone. A regular Kohen is allowed to be zich metamei to his relatives, however a Kohen Gadol is not. There is one exception. Exception is a meis mitzvah. Meaning, halachit means when there's a body of a person and a mace, and there's nobody to take care of it. It says, let us only talk about happy occasions, the Rebbe is, and let everybody live arichas yomim v'shanim tovos. What we are talking about here, meis mitzvah, it is meant in the spiritual sense. In the spiritual sense, though each and every yid is a kohen gadol, however, we are told there are cases where we must get involved and stop whatever we are doing and extend a hand to another yid. And that other yid, who at times may be in a position in the spiritual sense of a meis mitzvah, he spiritually considered not living, and there is nobody else to assist him, and there is nobody else to help him, and see to it that this person gets the proper attention. And this is the meaning here, what we are told. Va'atem tihyu li mamleches kohanim v'goy kodesh. What Yidden are told before receiving the Torah, we are told what our obligations are. That our obligations are that though we are kohanim g'daylim, when we see a Yid who is in the position there is nobody else to help him, it is our obligation to extend our arms and help the Yid in the spiritual need, whatever he may need, and help him. And this is the whole idea of Matan Torah. Whole requirement for Matan Torah was that the Yidden should be, as the Pasuk tells us, Vayichan Shom Yisrael. The Pasuk uses a singular expression that all the Yidden rested on Har Sinai. So Chazal comment that the Yidden were Ke'ish Echad, B'leiv Echad. They were all totally united. And Chazal used the expression as one man, Ke'ish Echad, and with one heart. Rabbi said this expression is also extremely accurate. Chazal could have said Ke'ish Echad. That would also be sufficient. Or K'leiv Echad. In other words, the Achdus of Klal Yisrael has to be reflected not only in the spiritual sense, saying that Yidden are like one heart. Sense of Leiv Echad is more spiritual level. Ish Echad reflects more in a Gashmiistic sense. The idea of Avas Yisrael, to the extent of Achdus Yisrael, as the Rebbe keeps on stressing, total unity amongst Klal Yisrael, has to be reflected mamish in Gashmias. In other words, a Yid needs a Tova b'Gashmias, a Yid needs assistance in Gashmias, any type of help which we can offer and give to another Yid, this is what Avos Yisrael demands from us. And all this came as a prerequisite, as a condition to Matan Torah. Once Yidden were in a position of Ish Echad, B'leiv Echad, that is when they were able to receive the Torah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is what we find in this week's Sedr. This week's Sedr is Parshas Naso. The emes is that B'chukoisai always has to be read before Matan Torah. This tracks back to a takana from the Goinim, and it is quoted in the Torah, that B'chukoisai always has to be read before Matan Torah. And in B'chukoisai we have the blessings, the brachas, and Chas v'Shalom, the contrary, in case Yidden do not observe Torah. And it is brought in Svarim that there is always one parsha in between B'chukoisai and Matan Torah. In other words, we always must read Bamidbar also before Shavuos. However, Naso is lav dafke. Naso, certain years it is read before Shavuos, certain years it is read after Shavuos. Truth is, the Rebbe says, even Parshas B'chukoisai, which has the inyanim, which as these inyanim seem to us, as we hear these inyanim, they are not the obvious good. These inyanim also have tremendous bracha in them. The only thing, these are hidden brachas, which are such high brachas that the Torah could not reveal it in the positive sense, and that is why the Torah said it in a negative sense. The Rebbe says, if we look into Chassidus, in the Chassidus of the Alter Rebbe, there are many mamorim of the Alter Rebbe, and many mamorim of the Tzemach Tzedek and Oira Torah, where they interpret many of these inyanim, of these psukim, which are psukim in the Torah, and they interpret it in the positive sense, how it is an inyan of bracha. And just to quote one of them, there's a pasuk there that tells us, Hageir asher bekirbecha yale male male. It's a pasuk in Parshas B'chukoisai, which tells us that the geir, the pasuk pshat, the geir amongst us, he will rise very, very high. So Chassidus teaches, whom do we refer to by this geir? So Chassidus explains that There's the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. Chazal tell us that really the Yetzer Hara is Akdem Mitan Nisei. He really came to the person before the Yetzer Tov. When is the completion of the Yetzer Tov within a person? It begins coming in by the bris. However, when does it become complete by a person? It is complete by one at the age of bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah. However, the Yetzer Hara is with a child from its beginning. So that is the pshat. Hageir asher bekirbecha yale maila maila. The geir, in other words, who is the geir? In comparison, relative, the Yetzer Tov to the Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer Tov is considered as a geir. Why? Because he came later than the Yetzer Hara. He's a newcomer. So this is what the pasuk tells us. Hageir asher bekirbecha yala mala mala. The geir, in other words, the latecomer, the newcomer, the Yetzer Tov will rise very, very high within you. In other words, telling us that the Yetzer Tov will really gain control of the person thoroughly.
That's in the Klolos.
There's a pasuk in the Klolos here. So,
Yeah. So how does it fit?
It's a bracha. So that's what the Rebbe is teaching. That's what Chassidus Bechlal does. Takes these psukim of the Klolos, Toichacha psukim, and explains them how they are really brachas. But the Torah, they are such great brachas that the Torah could not, that's what says Chassidus, couldn't have revealed it in a positive sense, in a sense of bracha.
So in other words, every one of those could also be learned in such a way.
In such a way as bracha, yes. Rebbe says memoni. Here the Rebbe is raising a question. All this is coming as a maimah hamuzga, indirectly, while discussing Parshas Naso, the kriya of this Shabbos. The Rebbe raises the question. We know by Yidden there's an Indian of chazokeh. In Gemara and Halacha there's a concept of chazokeh, which means if one gains control of a piece of property prior to the other one, Gemara Bavabascha discussed that he holds on to it for 3 years. It's because he's considered a muchzik, he's considered an owner. If so, obviously the Yetzer Tov does not have a chazak of the person, and who really gains control of the person, it is the Yetzer Hara, because the Yetzer Hara has been with the person for that many years longer. And at the same time we see that we even are mechanech youngsters, little children who do not possess the Yetzer Tov in full, that they should make a bracha and express HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name b'shem Malchus while making the bracha. So the Rebbe says chazaka applies where there are two equal people. It's a question whether one person will have it or the other person has it. Here halacha introduces a concept of chazaka, which means that the one who was there before gains control of the property or whatever we may be talking about. Different it is when there is a higher koyach involved. Here it is HaKadosh Baruch Hu that it's involved. It's not only amongst the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. It is HaKadosh Baruch Hu who wants that the person should be of Acharta B'chaim, that the person should select B'chaim and not refuse listening to the Yetzer Hara, should listen to the Yetzer Tov. So if so, the entire concept of Chazakah falls away. There's no reason to give Chazakah, to give preference to the Yetzer Hara at the time. This is against the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that Hager Asher Bekirbecha Yala Mala Maila, that the Yetzer Tov should gain total control of the person. B'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha, that a person should ultimately serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with both of his Yetzers, with the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. What is the whole idea of Parshas Naso? As we find in the word itself, Naso means to raise, to elevate. What is the whole union of this Shabbos? It is again another elevation. It picks up Yidden, another madrega, yet higher madrega, as an introduction to Kabbalah Satorah. And if we are to look specifically in today's Parsha of Shvi, in Parshas Naso we have all the details of the various karbanos which were brought by the Nesiim. And today, in today's Parsha, we have the Sachakal, the grand total of all of the Karbanos. What is reflected in this idea of the grand total? A concept of Achdus. In other words, what all the different korbanos, which were brought by all the different Nesiim. And as Chassidus explains with all the different intentions and kavanas each one of the Nesiim had. However, it comes today's day, we make a sachakul, we make a total of all of these korbanos. In other words, we unite all of these korbanos in today's day. So it again reflects an idea of Achdus Yisrael. Each of the Nesiim represented their respective Shevet. Comes today, we unite all of these Nesiim together. It's the idea of Ta'achana for Matan Torah, Ki ish echad b'leiv echad. The same we find today by Mincha. We began already reading Pashas Ba'aloischa. Ba'aloischa deals with the Menorah. The Menorah, the Pasuk tells us, was Miksha. It was out of one piece. Chazal tell us in detail. And at the same time, it shaped out into there were 7 candles in the menorah. It again reflects an idea of Achdus. So all this comes as an introduction to Matan Torah, because the whole preparation, the major preparation which the Yidden required in order to prepare themselves properly for Matan Torah was that they should be in a position of Ki ish echad b'leiv echad, total unity. Avas Yisrael, and not only Avas Yisrael, but Achdus Yisrael as well. Being what we just discussed about that the whole inyan of Matan Torah is that the Yidden are becoming Geirim, it is extremely appropriate that in today's Shir of the Rambam we learn Hilchas Milah. In the Hilchas Milah we find, it is in Perek Gimel, at the end of Perek Gimel, the Rambam stresses the greatness of Milah. The Rambam explains us how great Milah is. It is yet greater than Torah. By Torah we find Shalosh Brisais, 3 brissen, 3 bands, which were created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu with Yidden based on Torah. However, regarding Milah, Nichresu Shloish Esre Brisais im Avram Avinu, the Rambam tells us, that there were 13, a total of 13 Brisais, 13 bands, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu made with Avram Avinu regarding Milah. And the Rambam lists each and every one of them. And the Rambam concludes with the pasuk, Vesperisi Okim Es Yitzchok. So the Rebbe says this Rambam is not understood from several ways. First of all, we know that the idea of the Rambam is to tell us in Yonim and Halacha. Why does the Rambam get involved in the details, telling us all the 13 different psukim regarding the bris shekaras HaKadosh Baruch Hu Avram Avinu b'negei mitzvahs milah? It's not negei lahalacha to quote all the 13 psukim. Furthermore, the last pasuk which the Rambam quotes is this berisi okim es Yitzchak. First, the Rambam tells us that all these shloish esrei brises were made with whom? Im Avram Avinu. Comes now the very, very last one. As berisi okim es Yitzchak. This is a band which HaKadosh Baruch Hu made with Yitzchak, not with Avram. If we look in Yerushalmi, we find there's another expression of bris by Avram Avinu. So which this raises it not to 13, but to 14. Rabbi says there's the Tosfos Yontef, who's a commentary on Mishnah, quotes this inyan, and also quotes the Shloish Esrei Brisos, and does not quote the 14th bris, which the Yerushalmi brings. So the Rabbi says there are those that say that could be that the Tosfos Yontef was not aware of the Yerushalmi. So it's not easy to use such an expression, b'negei Tosfos Yontef. One has to be in a proper position to be able to say that b'negei him. But there are those that say it. To say that the Rambam was not aware of a Yerushalmi cannot be said. This nobody could say. Rambam was definitely aware of the Yerushalmi. So why is it that the Rambam does not quote the 14th pasuk as well? The Rebbe left all these questions unanswered in the Farbrengen, and said that Mirz Hashem in the next Farbrengen, he will answer these questions on the Rambam. Okay. One other question in today's Shir Rambam, it is after Hilchas Milah, the Rambam gives us Seder Tfilos Kol HaShana. Tells us exactly how we are to daven. And again, the Rebbe stressed how accurate each and every word in the Rambam in the Yad is, in the Yad HaChazaka, as opposed to the other Svarim of the Rambam, where the Rambam did not use a measure of such accuracy. For example, the Moira Nevuchim, or the Shalos Chuvas, which we have, the correspondence from the Rambam. It is the Yad HaChazaka where everything is extremely accurate. And it is here where the Rambam tells us exactly how we have to daven every day, and what we have to daven, and brings that we have to say the Parshas HaTamid. Parsha which we say in davening before Ktoiras, regarding how the Korban Tamid was brought daily in the Beis HaMikdash. The Rebbe says the only source for this Rambam is a Zohar. In Halacha, in Shas, Bavli, or in Yerushalmi, there's no source for this. Yeah, sure. So it's Torah Sa'ila. And again we see how the Rambam refers to how the Rambam opened the Sefer. Also with Pnimi HaTorah, the Rambam's opening was Yisoid HaYisoidos V'Amud HaChochmos, which immediately abbreviates the Shem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what does the Rambam tell us? What is most important? That one has to know about the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which all these are in Yonim of Pnimi HaTorah. Same here when the Rambam quotes the Seder HaTfilos, the Rambam also quotes an Inyan in Yonim, that the source that tells us that we are supposed to say these in Yonim and Tfilah is also in Pnimi HaTorah. Later in the Farbrengen, Rebbe learned a Rashi and a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos in today's Perik.
You don't want to say about Kieran?
I don't remember. Say. We gave the Mishnah in today's Perik. Today is the sixth Perik. Sixth Perik comes as an introduction to Shavuos, and this Perik is referred to as Kinyan Torah. In other words, this Perik is really not part of Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos in itself has 5 prokim. This Perik was added on to Pirkei Avos, and we say this the Shabbos before Shavuos, because this Perik really teaches us how one can acquire Torah. In Chutz La'aretz, between Pesach and Shavuos, all we can have is 6 weeks. 6 Shabbosim, rather. Rebbe says in Eretz Yisrael, it is possible for them to have 7 Shabbosim between Pesach and Shavuos. Rebbe says it would be interesting to inquire by Eretz Yisrael the Yidden, what is their custom regarding reciting Pirkei Avos. In other words, we only have 6 prokim. What do they do when they, in the year when the Kviyas is, when they have 7 Shabbosim between Pesach and Shavuos? However, in Chutz La'aretz it cannot happen. In Chutz La'aretz we only can have 6 Shabbosim between Pesach and Shavuos. Bechlal Pirkei Avos is Mila de Chasidusa. That is Bechlal the idea of Pirkei Avos. In other words, in Yonim of Lifnim Mishuras Adin. Question is, being that this became part of Pirkei Avos, it was added on, it's a Baraisa, this Perik Vav. What meaning is there in Shanu Chachamim Beloshen HaMishnah? That the Chachamim taught in the language of Mishnah. All of Mishnah is that way. What did we learn till now? We learned till now 5 Prakim in Pirkei Avos. Is then that not Beloshen HaMishnah? All Shisha Sidrei Mishnah are Beloshen HaMishnah. Here we have a Baraisa which opens with the words Shanu Chachamim Beloshen HaMishnah. Something completely not understood. Also, what is, being that this became part of Pirkei Avos, and we say it the Shabbos before Shavuos. What is the Milah de Chasidusa, which we can derive from this opening comment of Shanu Chachamim Beloshen HaMishneh, and then goes on, Baruch Shebacha Behem B'Mishnasam. Blessed is the one who has chose them and their teachings. So Rebbe explains, Shanu Chachamim Beloshen HaMishneh. Shanu Chachamim. Each and every Yid is referred to as a Chacham. And each and every Yid is obligated to share the knowledge of his Torah with another Yid. Vishinamtam levanecha, we are told, vanecha elu hatalmidim. Every Yid is obligated to teach Torah to other Yid. If we are fortunate that we possess Torah, it is our obligation to share this Torah with another Yid. However, what is the format, what is the method that has to be used when we relate Torah to other Yidden? Beloshen HaMishneh. Just like Mishnah is extremely brief and extremely to the point, this is the best method to use when we relate Torah to somebody else. Not getting involved into pilpulim that are not proper, as we will explain in a minute, or as the Rebbe has an expression which he uses, spalt nahor. It's a Yiddish expression which means to take a svara and go very, very delicate, split a hair. At the time, this is not the intention of this specific inyan which is learned. In other words, we are told that it is our obligation, when we learn Torah, we share our knowledge of Torah with another Yid, we have to relate it as brief and as basic as possible. This is what Mishnah stands for. It is noted that the difference between Mishnah and Gemara is, in Mishnah there is very little shakla v'tarya. There's very little conversation going on in Mishnah. Where does all the shakla v'tarya arouse in Gemara? So that is what we are told. Shanu Chachamim, each and every Yid, when he relates Torah to somebody else, it should be Beloshen HaMishneh. Just as the same format that Mishnah uses, every Yid should use when he relates Torah to somebody else. And that is why we find, in our daily davening, what are the inyanim of Torah which were inserted into our tefillah? We start right away with the Mishnah and Peah, Elu Dvarim She'elam Shir. It's a Mishnah and Peah. It's a Mishnah, a Mishnah which can easily be understood. Then we come further in davening, we recite the Berais of Rabbi Shmuel, we recite Ezeu Mekoiman. It's all inyanim which are inyanim that are spelled out very clear, and inyanim which can be related and understood and are expressed b'loshen k'tzorah. Baruch shebacha behem u'b'mishnasam. Blessed is the one that has chosen them, in other words, the Chachamim, u'b'mishnasam, and again, the way they have learned Mishnah and their teachings. But it doesn't mean in general in their teachings. It means specifically geared to the derech of Mishnah. In other words, the derech of Mishnah, excluding when one gets involved in pulim, which are not the proper intention of the sugya which is learned. Naturally, shakla v'tarya is required to learn. In other words, we cannot go through Gemara, we cannot go through sugyas if one does not have a proper approach to shakla v'tarya as well. But it has to be the right shakla v'tarya. And here the Rebbe told an episode. He says it was a famous story in Chassidische Chadorim, that a person once was mechadish chidushim in the Rambam, and he had many chidushim in the Rambam. He had a total of 10 inyanim in the Rambam, which none of the commentaries on the Rambam, none of the Mefarshei Rambam commented. When this person, after living 120 years, came to Yeneveld and was asked what was his accomplishment in this world, he said, "What do you mean, what was my accomplishment? I have created so many pirushim in the Rambam." So they asked him, "Who is your witness that you have created so many pirushim in the Rambam?" He says, "Why do I need a witness? Let us call the Rambam, and the Rambam himself will be the best witness that I have created so many pirushim in his pirush." Rambam was called, and this person speaks up to say how he has introduced so many great accomplishments and introductions into the Rambam. The Rambam says, fine, but this is not what I wrote. This does not agree to what I wrote in my Pirush. So the person says, sure, the Rambam says, what I wrote is, I spelled out befeirish that I mean something different. So this individual says back to the Rambam, you mean to say that you mean what you spelled out? This definitely was not your intention. So I was looking to create pshetlach, what could have been your intention? But to say that what is spelled out, this is what the Rambam meant, this definitely was not the Rambam's intention. In other words, this is what the Rebbe means at times, and in derech and learning, people get involved and build so many pulpulim and so many kashas and so many terutzim, which is totally not the intention of the sugya. This is totally not what was meant by the Tanoim v'Ameroim who put together the sugya. So therefore, here the Gemara, Mishnah, the Baraisa, praises the great advantage which is B'Loshna Mishnah. However, naturally, we're not shoylo, again the Rebbe keeps on stressing, we're not shoylo, we're not excluding, we're not degrading shakla v'talia. In other words, discussions in learning, involvement in learning. However, it has to be to the realm of the pshat, k'derech ha-mishnah. And that is why Baruch shebacha behem u'b'bishnasam. Blessed is the one that has chosen them and their mishnah. Especially we find in halacha. In halacha, the derech is it has to be extremely brief, precise, and to bring out the halacha as the halacha is. V'Hashem mimoy she'halacha kemoisei. This is a special gift which one gets, that Havayi imoy, Hashem is with him, and that is when he is gifted that halacha is like him. And this is the intention of the Mishnah here. Mishnah here, it's not stam an opening. There is definitely milah de chasidusa here, and there is a hera which we can derive from it, and an important hera. It's a hera that tells us a tremendous klal how we are supposed to base our entire derech of limud HaTorah, and specifically when we are relating Torah to somebody else. The Rebbe also referred to that this Shabbos there is a pegisha, and that the topic of the pegisha of this Shabbos is family. How family life is supposed to be al pi Torah. The Rebbe referred to the Sicha which he spoke this past Sunday when the Rebbe spoke to the Sheikh Chabad, where the Rebbe explained how each and every person, in other words, each and every couple that's formed, this is the completion of one guf. In other words, a man himself or a woman himself, before they meet and are married al pi Torah, they are in a position, as Chazal refer to them plag gufa. Plag gufa meaning a half. They're only a half. They're incomplete. When does a person reach to his completion? This is when Zocha Nekeva Bara Lekim Oisam Vayevarech Oisam, and when Yidden feel zich al pi Torah and they are married together, this is when there is the completeness of one human being. It's not the pshat, it's two separate people. It is one half and another half that get together, and this is what marriage accomplishes. Here the Rebbe referred to the first mitzvah in the Torah. First mitzvah in the Torah is, Yidden are told, Pru urvu milu es haaretz v'kifshuha. The Rebbe stressed that it is, again, which the Rebbe spoke at length at many occasions, that it is, a Yid should not get involved in the Rebishtas Balabatischkeit, deciding how many children they should have, and all this should be left in the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rebishter is the one that gives the children, and the Rebishter gives them. He provides all their needs as well. The Rebbe just spoke, I think it was in the Achim Pesach Farbrengen, and another recent Farbrengen. When a child is born, his entire parnasa is born together with him, and not only his parnasa, but it also brings bracha to the entire family as well. Rabbi said there are those that te'ena heim mevakshim, expression which the Rabbi uses, meaning those that are seeking for arguments and are looking to raise questions. And they raise the question, how is it that we say that a woman is just as choshev as a man al pi Torah, at the time we know that there are certain mitzvahs which women are not obligated to do, to the extent that there's a mitzvah of Soim Tasim Alecha Melech, that we are told that we shall appoint a king upon us, and a king we know can only be a man, Melech v'loi Malcha. And at the same time we keep on stressing that in Torah's Emes, the Torah has given the same amount of chshivas to a woman as the Torah has given to a man. How does this agree with this fact that the woman cannot be appointed to a king, and at the same time there are many mitzvahs which women are potter from? As the Rebbe explained it today, Rebbe explained that basically find the pasuk in the Torah of who yimshel ba. When it's the question between man and woman, the Torah tells us that man shall rule over woman. And this, the Rebbe explained today, derives from the fact that a man is basically moyach, as opposed to the woman who's mostly leiv, emotion, midos. Though at the same time there's the expression bina liba, which shows us and introduces that by leiv, in emotions, there's also an inyan of bina. In midas, there's at the same time there's an intellect of bina. And at the same time we are told, and we know that by moichin, there's also a mixture, a blend of midas. However, at the same time we know that still, this is when we go down to precise detail. However, in general, it is the man who is noted for moichin, as the woman who's noted for the inyan of midas. Therefore, the Rebbe says, just like we know, expression of Chazal that he used, which reflects, expression of Chazal that two leaders cannot be at the same time. Thank you. Two leaders cannot be at the same time. That is why the Torah suggested that it was the most healthy situation to set up in proper Jewish family life to have one as a leader, but this does not which is the man, the zocher, as the Torah says, v'hu yimshel ba. But at the same time, this does not degrade in any way the chshivas of the woman. On the contrary, the Torah has given the woman its chshivas in many, many areas, and many inyanim which were not given to the man. And these are inyanim of extreme chshivas, as the Rebbe spoke at length last Sunday and at many other occasions, which this shows us that the Torah does not in any way degrade the woman. Chas v'sholem. The only thing is, the Torah told us that there are different assignments which are given to the man, different assignments which are given to the woman, and for the best success of the upkeep of the world, it has been so that the Torah has formulated that it should be in a way that v'hu yimshel ba, but this at the same time does not chas v'sholem degrade that the woman is less chashiv than a man. It does not. The fact that the woman does not have certain mitzvahs, or the fact that a woman cannot be a king, same tasem alecha melech v'loi malka, this does not mean that she's not as chashiv as the husband. On the contrary, she was given a tremendous chshivas by the fact that she was given this great treasure from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this great obligation that she's the one that's primarily involved in the raising of the children. It was last Sunday, the Rebbe quoted a Chazal, the Rebbe spoke to the women last Sunday, the Rebbe quoted a Chazal, the Rebbe uses the expression, Koton hatzorich le'imoy. Expression is benegei sukkah. Question is, which children are obligated to eat in the sukkah? So Gemara uses the expression, Koton hatzorich le'imoy, a child that still has to come out to his mother. So we see that the Gemara uses the expression, Koton hatzorich le'imoy. The Gemara doesn't use the expression, Koton hatzorich le'aviv. This shows us the great tie and the great tremendous achrayus, an obligation which the Torah has given to the Jewish mother in raising the children, particularly when the children are young, which this is the most important part of chinuch, this the Torah has given to the Jewish mother. So this shows us that not chas v'sholom that the Torah has given any priority to man over woman. The only thing is, Rabbeinu Shalom has told us each and every one of them has their obligation. Etc. Rebbe is learning a Rashi in Pashas Naso. In Kapitel Hey, Pasuk Zayin. Pasuk says, it comes in a continuation to Pasuk Vav. Pasuk Hey begins, Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe Leimer. Then the Pasuk goes on, Daber al Bnei Yisrael, Isha Yisha, Ki Yasru Mekol Chatos Adam, anyone that will sin, Limoil Mal B'Hashem, V'oshma HaNefesh Ahi. What do we mean by Limoil Mal? So there's a whole arichas in Rashi. Rashi says this is a repeat of a parsha which was already discussed in Parshas Vayikra. And it means that if we look back to Parshas Vayikra, at the end of Parshas Vayikra, the Torah there discusses various details. When one holds back pay from his worker, or one has stolen from somebody else, or he has stolen from a ger, and the ger passed away and there's nobody else to pay back to, there are no relatives to pay back. Various inyanim which are discussed in Parshas Vayikra. So here the pasuk continues. V'hisvadu es chatosam asher osu. They shall say vidui, confess ve'avere, ve'heishiv es hashamay beroishay. He shall pay back what he has sinned, what he has stolen, what he has taken away. And also ve'chamishiso yosef elov. He shall add on a fifth. V'nosan la'asher osham loy. And this shall be given to the one whom he has harmed. What does Rashi say on the words la'asher osham loy? Rashi comments lemi shenes chayiv loy, to the one who has become obligated to. First of all, there's no need for Rashi to comment anything. If we touch up the word la'asher osham loy, that's what it means. If we were to check back in Vayikra, where Rashi, as Rashi just said, that this inyan comes behemshech to inyanim which were discussed in Parshas Vayikra, Rashi there uses a completely different expression. Rashi there uses the expression lemi sha'amamin shaloi. The pasuk there also says la'asher osham loy, but there the pasuk says lemi sha'amamin shaloi, that the money is his. Here Rashi stays away from that for some sort of a reason. Lemi shenes chayiv loy, to the one that he has become obligated to. Sifsech Achonim introduces a whole new idea. Sifsech Achonim wants to tie this into the concept of Shibuda de Rab Nosson. Shibuda de Rab Nosson is a concept known in Gemara, which means if I owe money to Ruvain, and I know that Ruvain owes money to Shimon, instead of paying Ruvain, I can go ahead and pay directly to Shimon, because I owe Ruvain. Ruvain owes Shimon, so I can pay Shimon directly. So the Sifsech Chachamim wants to say that this is what Rashi intends here, the same thing. Lemi shenes chayiv loy. He will go and pay to the one. He's paying back Gzeila, right? So he can pay to the person whom the Nigzel owes. In other words, he's not paying directly to Nigzel, because the Nigzel owes money to somebody else. He stole from Ruvain. However, he knows that Ruvain owes money to Shimon, so Rashi here tells us that he can go and pay to the one who it is owed to. And here it is ultimately Shimon. A very strange pshat with Rashi. He has to, he can. No, let's not get involved in the details. But it's a very strange idea. We're talking to a child who's learning Chumash, about Chumash Lemikra. He does not know of the existence of such a halachic concept of Shibuda de Rab Nosson. What the Rebbe is learning here, a person is obligated to pay what he has harmed, what he has stolen, or whatever the specific case may be. And at the same time, the Torah tells him that he also has to add on a fifth. What is this chamishis? This is a knas, actually. If we look carefully into the pasuk, we will notice that the pasuk divides it into two types of things. V'heishev es hashamai beroishe. First he pays what he owes, principal. Then this knas, this penalty which he has to pay, v'chamishisa yosef alav, and the Torah adds on v'nosan la'asher hashamai. Torah could have made one pasuk. V'heishev es hashamai la'asher hashamai. He will give him the principal and the chamishis. So we see that the Torah makes two separate givings of it. Why? Because the person understands that really the principal, he has to pay back to this person. He stole from him, he has to pay him back. However, he does not know whom does he have to give this penalty to. There is a chance to say that the penalty he has to give to the person whom he stole it from, and could be he has to give it to Bezdin, could be he has to give it to a third. There's another source where he has to give it to. So that is why Rashi stresses here, not on the Keren, not on the principle. Rashi is stressing Benegeya the Chamishis, this penalty which was put on him. This Chamishisa Yosef Alav, this has to be given La'asha Asham Loi. What does Rashi teach? Lemi sheneschayev loy. Rashi cannot use the words Lemi shehamamain shaloi. It is not his. Person got back his already. He got back the principle. So we cannot call this chamishis, this penalty, we cannot call it Lemi shehamamain shaloi. It's not his. The only thing is, it wasn't his before it was stolen from him. Here the Torah has introduced a new inyan. The Torah has told us that for any of these Averas, he has to pay back the principal, plus an additional Chamishis. So Rashi is stressing, who does this additional Chamishis go to? Lemi sheneschayev loy, to the one who the Torah pasked that he has to give it. And in this case, it is the owner. But we cannot use the term that Rashi uses in Vayikra, Lemi she'amamin shaloi. It's not mamin shaloi. The fact why Rashi in Vayikra does use the expression Lemi she'amamin shaloi, this question does remain. The Rebbe said he's not getting involved in explaining there in Pashas Vayikra. He's only explaining here in Naso, and here in Naso we can understand that Rashi cannot use the expression Lemi she'amamin shaloi, but rather must use Lemi she'neschayev loy. It's something which he hasn't owned before. It was never his. It's not shaloi. But the Torah told us that together with the principle, we also have to, the one who has sinned also has to give back a chamishis, an additional fifth. The Rebbe urged that we prepare ourselves properly to Matan Torah, adults as well as youngsters, and particularly to see to it that all children, youngsters, and infants should all be brought to shul on the first day of Shavuos to the reading of the Aseres HaDibros. And we shall prepare ourselves properly, and this will bring to the Geula Shleima, as the Rebbe expressed himself, that Nesiei Chabad, the previous Nesiei Chabad, together with all of the Go'onei and Tzadikei HaDoyer, will rise with the coming of Mashiach, and we will all return together with them to Eretz Yisrael. Together with it, the Rebbe urged very strongly on the fulfillment, listed each one of the Mivtzoyim. All the Mivtzoyim have a very special shaychus to Shavuos. Each one of them, including as well to see to it that every Yid has an ois, a letter in Sefer Torah. And Sefer Torah HaKlal is for those that do not have it yet. And we shall be zeiche to have Kabbalas HaTorah b'simcha or b'pnimiyis, which this is an expression which was introduced by the Frierdiker Rebbe. We shall be able to accept the Torah with joy and with pnimiyis, with real internal acceptance of the Torah. Let us be zeiche to Kabbalas HaTorah b'simcha b'pnimiyis. A gute Woche.